both sets of people, they obviously have that common factor where they both don't have children. However, you know, being childless is very different from being child-free. So being childless is basically someone that very much wants to be a parent and isn't for whatever reason, or it might be someone that has had a child which they've lost and they are no longer a parent. But basically, in a nutshell, it's someone that wants to be a parent and that isn't, or wanted to be a parent and never was. Okay, and it causes them some, you know, substantial distress in their life. Someone who is child-free, on the other hand, is someone that isn't a parent and is actually okay with it, someone that might be happy with that or at peace with that, or is just, you know, doesn't really affect them. It might have done in the past, but they've decided that they don't want to have children, or they've decided that they're actually okay with not having children and they're quite happy to embrace, you know, a child-free life. So it's very, very different. So who is childless? There are so many different types of people who are childless, you know, people that you might never have even imagined that would be childless, that you would consider to be childless. So, you know, it's not just, for example, you know, the couple that you know that live down your street, or, you know, friends of yours that haven't been able to have children, which is very sad. And it is sad, it's devastating, like devastating. But it can be just as devastating, or more devastating, or less devastating. I mean, it's all relative. For that single friend of yours, you know, there might be a single friend of yours, male or female or whatever they are. They may never have had children, they might be on their own. Don't underestimate the fact, just because they're not in a couple and they haven't been, you know, trying to have a baby, doesn't make their upset and their grief actually any less valid or any less painful. Okay, unfortunately, you know, some of these things are taboo, and there is a kind of shame around it, and it could be more difficult for them to talk about it. And, you know, it's almost like sometimes it kind of becomes a joke, you know, cat lady, or, you know, oh, you must be loving your single life, you can go out drinking every night and partying, and you must love a lion, and all the rest of it. And, you know, these kind of stereotypes that, you know, kind of thrown around. But don't underestimate that that person is depressed, hiding, you know, carrying around a secret grief with them, that they're feeling like hopeless, that they're really struggling. You know, don't just make assumptions that your neighbour, your friend, your sister, your daughter, your work colleague in the office, just because they don't have children, they might be childless or child-free. And it's not fair to make assumptions. Everyone's got their story behind, you know, their choices, or they might not have had a choice about it. It might just happen. So yeah, so someone who is childless doesn't necessarily, you know, need to be that kind of stereotype. It might be, for example, your elderly transgender neighbour that lives upstairs who's like 85. They might identify with being childless, and it might be an issue that they've carried with them their entire life. You know, they might be still grieving that fact that they've never had children, they've never had grandchildren, they've never had great-grandchildren, they've never, you know, they might have carried that grief and that upset and that burden with them their whole life and never really spoken about it either. So, you know, the next time you're making comments about cat ladies and, oh, you know, you better meet someone and get a move on because, you know, you need to have kids and all the rest of it, just consider, like, everyone's got a story behind things, and people might be carrying around a certain grief or a certain shame. There can sometimes be a shame that's carried around. It's not just the fact of having a baby, you know, which is great, obviously, but that's not just the point of, you know, why someone would be upset about being childless. It's not just the having a baby thing. It's about having a family. It's about fulfilling your role on this earth. It's about growing old alone. It's about every Christmas, Easter, Sunday lunch, first day at school, birthdays, anniversaries. It's all of those things which impacted throughout an entire lifetime. It's the longing for, the yearning for, the missing, the upset, the grief, you know, it's all of that, you know. There's so many other things that come with being childless. It's not just, oh, you know, just having a baby, you know, that's, you know, that's an enormous part of it that's like can rip your heart out. But it's not just that, it's can make you question your identity, your purpose, you know, the meaning of life. There's so much more in these things, as I said, you can carry around for a lifetime, and often not talk about them because some people think, you know, some people actually don't realise, I think, that they're grieving childlessness. It is a grief, you know, when you've got love that you can't, when you've got like an immense amount of love that you can't direct somewhere, that ends up in being grief. You know, when we miss someone, we've got love for them. You know, when we miss someone that's passed away, we've got love for them which we can no longer give to them, and that ends up being grief. You know, loss and grief, for example, you know, when our dreams are shattered, when when we've lost, when our business has failed, whatever, we have these immense feelings of loss and grief because we've got this passion, this love, you know, this yearning to fulfill something that hasn't been able to be fulfilled, and that can stay with us, and that can, you know, that can be very hurtful. That can take a lot of getting over, a lot of healing, and in some cases we may never be healed, but in some cases we can move on and we can see the other side and we can find ways to heal ourselves. So that's childless. There's many reasons for being childless. It could be that you've just never met the right person. It could be that you've met the right person but you've broken up before you managed to plan a family. It could be that they've broken up with you. It could be that you were pregnant and you miscarried. It could be that you found out you were infertile. It could be that you found out you're infertile and you couldn't afford IVF. It could be that you could afford IVF but it didn't work. It could be that you wanted to adopt but you aren't financially stable. It could be that you tried to adopt but you got refused. I mean, the amount of stories, everyone has got so many stories who's childless. There's an infinite amount of stories and reasons, and everyone's story and everyone's grief is absolutely valid. You know, there's a strong misconception that if you wanted a child, and not everyone thinks that obviously, but you know, sometimes, oh well, you didn't try hard enough or whatever, and that's not productive and it's not helpful. Everyone has their own story, their own reasons, all of which are valid, you know. Child-free, on the other hand, it could be that you have been childless and you've actually, over the years or however long it is, that you've actually come to the conclusion that actually, no, I'm actually much happier like this, and I'm actually glad that I didn't have children because X, Y, Z, and you kind of, you know, you've kind of got over that grief and you're actually really happy about it and you're quite happily child-free, and you come to an acceptance about it, and if you had that choice now, you wouldn't want to have children. So, you know, or it could be that you're child-free because you never wanted to have children, and that's fine too. You know, we don't all have to follow a certain path and have that certain instinct. We're all different. We're all humans. We're all unique beings. We don't all want the same things and desires, and why should we? Otherwise, we'd all be the same. And, you know, variety is the spice of life, right? So we should all want to have different things. Either group shouldn't be judged, because why should anyone be judged for what they wanted or what they didn't want or what they wanted and couldn't have? I mean, at the end of the day, we should all just have empathy for each other and accept each other. But I just wanted to clarify those differences, childless and child-free, because sometimes I see them being used a lot in place of each other, and I think it's quite important to raise awareness. It's definitely a start. I mean, there's a lot of which is not known or not discussed about in regards to being child-free and childless, and I think it's time to really have that conversation.